Now that we've tried to create our own variables, what happens if you accidentally overwrite one? Is there any way that you can protect yourself and your variables from being overwritten? Yes, there is. You can use read-only variables and constant variables. Let's try it now. Let's start by creating two new variables. In this case, I'll call them read-only variable and constant variable to keep it simple. In this example, I'm going to use the long form of the new variable command, where I run the commandlet new variable dash name read-only variable dash value and a sentence that I'd like to be set for the value. At the end of the line, I'm going to add an option called read-only. For the second variable, I'll call it constant variable. I'll set the name, and I'll set the value similar to how I did on the previous line. I'll also set the option to constant. Next, I'll use the write host command to output the value of the two variables. In this example, we only want the new variable commandlet to be run once for each of our variables. So we have to remember that after we execute our script the first time, we need to comment out the first two lines. Now let's try running our script and viewing the value of the first variable. Notice that it is set to, you can only change this if you use the force. Now let's comment out the first two lines so we don't run them again. Now let's uncomment the second variable, constant variable, and look at the value. Notice that it is set to, you cannot change this. To make things a little bit easier to read, let's add some text to our write host command for both of the variables. Let's add the words read-only to the first one, and let's add the word constant to the second one. Now when we run our script, we can see read-only, colon, and the value, as well as constant, colon, and the value. Also notice that we kept the first two lines commented out. That's very important because our variables already exist. Now let's use the set variable commandlet with the name property and the value property to change the value of our two variables. One thing you might be asking yourself is, can I change it? For the second variable, that is a constant, we should ask ourselves, can I change this one? To keep everything in the same logical order, let's move our write host commands down to the bottom. Notice that when we execute our script, we get the same output and nothing has changed. Now let's uncomment our set variable command for the read-only variable and see what happens. Cannot overwrite variable. So let's comment out that line and try the second one. Run the script. The same error, we cannot overwrite the variable. So we know now that we cannot overwrite the read-only variable or the constant variable without doing something extra. So let's try again, but let's add an extra property to the end of this command. We will add -force. Now let's run the script and see what happens. Notice that the output of the read-only variable did change this time. Now let's comment out that line and uncomment out the constant variable and see if we can try the same trick. No, unfortunately not. You cannot use force in the same way to overwrite a constant variable. Notice that our variable outputs are still the same. The first one is changed and the second one is unchanged. Think of using constants and read-only variables as various levels of safety. You can use these different procedures to protect your variables from accidental change.